Welcome to the GeoTrek podcast. This is podcast episode 97. If you enjoyed last episode with award-winning meteorologist Alan Seals, you're going to love this one. We're going back into his personal journey. How did he become passionate about weather? How did he end up moving to the Gulf Coast? And really hearing more about his journey through meteorology and really getting to the point of being one of the greatest weather communicators in the nation and just really well known for his trade. Well, welcome to the GeoTrek podcast. If you're new to the podcast, GeoTrek explores the world to cover stories about extreme weather and natural disasters not covered by the mainstream media. We're interested to learn more about the physical processes behind these extreme events, their impacts on society, and what we can do to get out ahead of them to reduce the loss of life and property. Well, Alan, so excited to have you on the podcast again. We had to do back-to-back with you. Yeah. We wanted to hear about your journey, but last episode we thought we also wanted to hear your insights about tropical weather with an extremely active hurricane season forecast. Could you share a little bit about yourself, your introduction? If people are listening to this episode, they're saying, who is Alan Seals? Could you share a little bit about yourself?
Alan Seals is a weather nerd, a weather geek. He's a guy who always was interested in weather, but also growing up, he was at times the class clown. He liked to perform, make people laugh. He played trumpet from third grade through high school and actually was almost going to be a music major, except he was wise enough to realize that he was not a good trumpet player. So he said, nope, I cannot do this profession. So a love for music, an interest in meteorology came together in high school where, I'll talk about me now, where I realized that I could be a performing scientist, a science performer in the form of a TV weather broadcaster, combining my love for talking, entertaining, and teaching at the same time. So grew up outside of New York City, Mount Vernon, New York, went to public school, had a great childhood. I was a paper boy from sixth grade through high school. So I delivered newspapers every day of the year. I walked to school. Elementary school was almost a mile. High school was almost 2 miles. So I was constantly outside, constantly, like most active kids before the internet and before social media. Fun for me was building a snowman, having a snowball fight. But also what amazed me as a kid was there were a lot of little incidents related to the weather. One was when I was probably first grade, being outside in the evening, it was snowing, and seeing lightning and hearing thunder. So I experienced thunder snow as a little kid, and it scared me because I didn't expect it, and it made me wonder, how is this possible? How could you have lightning and thunder when it's so cold? As I got a little older, one of my assignments that my mother had for me each morning was to look out our window and read the thermometer to let her know what the temperature was before she went to work. And in doing so, I realized there were a couple of times during the year where the thermometer would heat up really quickly, and that turned out to be the time of the year where the sun directly hit it early in the morning. So I started learning, okay, you have radiation, you have conduction, it makes sense. Third grade, my teacher, Miss Costello, took the class outside, and we had a little project where we laid in the grass, we looked up at the cumulus clouds, and we tried to imagine what shapes they look like. And while we were doing that, I started wondering, how is it possible a cloud could float? And that's sort of the weather geeky, nerdy part of me. And it goes down to the molecular weight of hydrogen, oxygen, and versus nitrogen, and a slight updraft, which is still amazing to me this day, that you can get a cloud that floats over your house, drops rain, and then totally dissipates. And then a little later, in I think probably fourth or fifth grade, I experienced just an average hailstorm in the middle of the summer. And I couldn't conceive of how ice could fall from the sky when it's 85 degrees. So all those things just sort of simmered with me through my childhood. It was interesting, but I never thought of it as a profession. One thing that also I never really focused on is growing up, my dad worked behind the scenes at CBS News. So I was exposed to the concept of journalism and broadcasting, but I still did not watch TV news. Even through high school, I didn't watch it. But I did somehow figure out that I could be a TV meteorologist and be able to help people have job security, because weather controls all aspects of our lives, and also have fun with it. So that's when I said, okay, TV weather, that's what I want to do.
Well, it sounds like a lot of this interest in meteorology just sprung from natural curiosity as a child, just looking at the world around you, right?
Yeah, and as I talk to people, adults, so many people say, yeah, I wanted to be a meteorologist, and then I saw the math. And so I think all of us have that curiosity. Some of us, a few of us, follow through, and we struggle through the math that you'll get in college, which I ended up going to Cornell University, and if people don't understand the meteorology degree, 3 semesters of calculus, 2 semesters of chemistry, 2 semesters of physics, and that's before you even start studying about clouds. So that is the obstacle for most people when it comes to meteorology.
It's a pretty heavy academic load. Well, that's good because I heard there's no partying at Cornell. So you can just focus on those mathematics, right?
Cornell, in that day, I can't speak for now, was a party school. It was a very social atmosphere, and I had the time of my life. In fact, I was also a DJ, both a standalone DJ and a radio DJ. And I learned something really important about that. It was about communication. And when you're a DJ, you control the mood of the people by playing what they want to hear, ideally. So that was everything I did as an undergrad was geared toward communicating weather. Something else important happened at Cornell, and that's where I learned more closely that I had a New York accent. And my normal speech pattern, I drop the letter I and I start talking fast like a New Yorker. And especially when I talk to someone else from New York, it comes back. So my biggest challenge throughout my career, and to this day remains, listening to myself as I talk through my ears to not talk like a New Yorker.
That's fascinating. So can that even still come back, like the accent, if you're talking to someone from New York or you go back to the city?
Definitely. As soon as I get off the plane, when I go back to visit family and relatives, it's just right back where it was. But I'm aware of it, and that's the key thing. A lot of people are not aware that they have a regional dialect, and that's the thing. That's part of what I think has helped me as a broadcaster is listening to myself forces me to slow down. But it also forces me to say, wait a minute, did I say that backward? Did I say the wrong state or the wrong city? So that's been a plus. But anyway, so after Cornell, because my social life, I got an A in social life and a C in academic life. So I realized I need to go to grad school. I need to toughen up my science. And I ended up going to Florida State. I had a teaching assistantship, which was really cool because it paid the way for me to go through. But the teaching assistantship made me a teacher. I taught introductory meteorology to non-majors. So this was my first real communication experience. And the great thing about a live audience is you can tell by their body language when you're losing them.
Instant feedback, right?
Right. So I really enjoyed that. In fact, in my third job, I taught meteorology at Columbia College in Chicago. And after I got to Mobile, I taught and still teach broadcast meteorology at the University of South Alabama. So anyway, after, where was I? Cornell, Florida State for 2 years. 2 weeks after I graduated Florida State, I had my first job in Albany, Georgia as a TV meteorologist. I worked there 1 year and then got a job offer in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Didn't know anyone in Milwaukee, although I did marry a Milwaukeean. We are still going strong. Had the time of my life, worked for a great weather team, Channel 4, Paul, Joseph, and Jim Ott. It was unique at that station that all 3 of us had master's degrees in meteorology. And I don't know if there's any other TV station that has ever had a staff of 3 meteorologists all with master's degrees. So we were all weather geeks. Milwaukee was great. After Milwaukee, I ended up getting a job at WGN in Chicago, worked with Tom Skilling from 1992 to 1996 or 7. Then I went to the NBC station in Chicago, WMAQ, which most people don't know it by name, but they know of it because that is the station that tried to hire Jerry Springer to do commentary on the 10 o'clock news.
No way. Okay, these are backstories we didn't know about. This is amazing.
It is. What was unique about that station, it was owned by NBC, and the weather office was on the ground floor of the NBC tower. Jerry Springer studio was on the second floor. So while we were preparing our weather segments, we'd watch people lining up from around the country to go into the Jerry Springer show.
Wow.
And we were able to watch it. We had a closed circuit feed, so we could watch it as they were recording. But in any event, the story with that Jerry Springer hiring attempt is it didn't work out. The public totally said, hey, don't do this. Half the staff signed a petition to management saying, please don't do this. At the end of the day, the managers were fired, half the staff was fired, and I was let go at the end of my contract. I knew it was coming, and it didn't really bother me because I realized at that point Chicago was a great place to work, but I had no career advancement. It was more personality oriented than science oriented at the time. So that's the short version of how I got to Mobile.
And your background obviously was really strong in science. I can't wait to hear about your journey back to the Gulf Coast, but we have to do a quick pause with that. I'm picturing you at Soldier Field or Lambeau Field, -4 degrees and windy. You're all bundled up. Is that an accurate picture at all, or were you kind of like inside and hunkered down when in these brutal Midwestern winter events?
Fortunately, usually inside.
Gotcha. But obviously you're up there forecasting lake effect snow and all this, very different weather than New York and even also than the Gulf Coast, right? So just experiencing and forecasting community weather in a different part of the country.
Oh, yeah. Yep. The 4 solid seasons, which is what I always liked growing up. The true fall colors, fall foliage, snow on the ground is pretty, it's quiet, and then tornado threats.
And then the summers are amazing. And then you get back to the I-10 corridor where the summers are pretty hot and humid. Let's talk about your transition over to Mobile then.
Yeah. So after I left the Channel 5 in Chicago, for a while I was unemployed, which was actually worked out great professionally because I was teaching. I had a chance to become more involved with the local chapter of the American Meteorological Society. I also stumbled into the world of educational videos. There was a small company in Chicago that I did a weather video for them, and I looked at it and I said, oh, I could do this. And it was just about the same time that computers were becoming way more part of society, and nonlinear video editing was coming into being, and digital cameras were coming into being. So I was able to start creating my own weather videos, educational videos, which are still being distributed now by Discovery Education.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah,
and that's just a different way of communicating a different media form, right?
Yeah, so it goes to kindergarten, first grade, second grade, all the way through high school. They're distributed around the world, literally around the world, which was fun. But that's the same skill I used on TV, and it was a gap to get me to the job offer to bring me to Mobile. At the time, the station that hired me, WKRG, they had just bought the latest weather computer. They had just bought their own Doppler radar, the first station in Mobile to do so. And they also had a helicopter. So they were making a real big push to make weather their brand. And this followed the active mid-90s of hurricanes. And they said, okay, we need someone who can deal with this. And they reached out to me, and it turned out to be the right place at the right time. And I ended up staying at that station for 20 years.
Wow, that's amazing. And so you would have been here during the 04 season with Hurricane Ivan, 05 with Katrina, and the very hyperactive hurricane seasons. What was it like getting down here on the I-10 corridor? You're kind of back in the South. You had lived in Tallahassee, but now you're a broadcast meteorologist with a large audience and these big impactful storms like Ivan and Katrina. Yeah. What was it like to forecast those?
It was, the plus for me was, even when I was in Chicago, finally, in the 90s, I was able to start going to weather conferences. And I would go to the National Weather Association conference, the American Meteorological Society conference. And that's where you learn. College teaches you basics. It teaches you how to learn. But the reality, you learn by listening to people who have done it before. So that's where I learned a lot of the tropical stuff, even before I moved to Mobile. And then, of course, after coming here, I would continue to go to the conferences. I still do. And go to additional conferences. So all of those prepared me very well for Ivan. And what's amazing about it is that to a meteorologist, a hurricane it's especially a broadcast meteorologist, it's like the Super Bowl. Even though it's a negative experience for the public, It's where you use every skill you ever gained. It's where you use all the knowledge that you've gained. And it's also where you learn a lot as you're going along. So that's the way Ivan was for me. It was an incredible storm where it was out in the Gulf and we were seeing reports of 50-foot waves. I didn't believe it because I had never experienced it or worked with it. I think overall, and I still get positive feedback, that I help prepare the community just, again, from going to conferences and teaching people, okay, when the storm comes in, the wind will be from the south. It'll be from the southeast. You'll get storm surge. Once it goes in, the winds will shift. Here's what you should prepare for. Something as simple as if you have an east to west fence, when the storm comes in, it's probably going to blow that fence to the north. I mean, just basic things. And people to this day still remind me, as I forgot, that after Ivan, we were on average out of electricity for a week. And I had told people during the storm, I said, go outside at night and you could see the Milky Way. And this may be the only time you could see it in your city because of the light pollution. And people still remark about that.
These things that people often aren't thinking about, they're just focused on the storm itself, and you're explaining to them, you'll be able to see the stars afterwards. And I know a lot of broadcast meteorologists talk as well about reminding people, not only are you going to see these awesome stars at night, you're also not going to have air conditioning and heat exhaustion. And you may be facing weeks of power outages, just explaining, helping people really envision what this looks like during the storm, but also after the storm, right?
Yeah. And one of the challenges for me, and I think for all broadcasters, is when a hurricane or a big storm is coming, we're focused on the science of the storm, how big it is, how fast it's moving, how much rain or snow or lightning or hail you may get. But we need, and I finally started doing more of it, talking about the impact of that. And when a hurricane comes, and I especially did it on social media, I would literally say, okay, ladies, tell your husband, your uncle, your brother, your son, come inside. Don't let them take a risk that most women don't take. And that we find that with a lot of weather incidents, that men are greater risk takers, and unfortunately they tend to lose their lives more frequently.
Well, and that's interesting. That shows insight into sociology, right? Understanding how these impacts often play out statistically, and then helping people get out ahead of that and avoid being blindsided, right?
Right. Yep. So that's been great. My career has been great. I've retired recently from the TV aspect of it, and in part because, well, I changed and TV changed. Thinking back to when I first started in the mid 1980s, that was the early age of computers. Most people didn't have a home computer. TV stations had computers. We had the graphics we used only had 16 colors. There were no satellite loops. You could get one satellite image and one radar image, but you had to download it on a modem.
Which could take a long time.
One at a time. At that time, though, TV stations, the job is being a part of the community, broadcasting to the community, helping the community. But you typically had 3 newscasts during the day, and that was it. Now, maybe you had a sister radio station you might do a forecast for, but now you have multiple stations, sister stations, sub-channels, multiple platforms, weather apps, streaming video. There's so much more now that weather broadcasters do that they didn't used to do.
Well, you mentioned doing 3 broadcasts a day, so I'm picturing maybe something in the morning or midday, obviously the evening news and then the late night news.
Yeah.
And then that was it, right? If there was something you forgot to say on air, that was all. Now you're getting a lot of this interaction with social media, right? With your viewers between broadcasts, after broadcast. So how does that feel really different for a broadcast meteorologist, that you have a lot of this interaction online as well?
Yeah, a double-edged sword. The greatest part of it is you can, especially in weather events, you get more feedback, you get more confirmation of what you're predicting. Yes, it is raining here now. Yes, it is flooding at this community. We had wind damage. You could see a picture of it. So that is a plus. The other plus is people are excited to interact and talk about science and get geeky about it. So the flip side of that is there's some people who expect you to be their personal instructor. They learn one little thing and then they come back and say, well, I heard this. What does that mean? Well, what does this mean? Well, what's your opinion about this? And they just go on. And I literally have had to tell some people, look, I appreciate that you love weather, but here's some links that will take you to a website that will answer all of these questions.
Well, I'm sure with social media, you've also gotten, what about in my neighborhood? What's going to happen? Will it be raining on Saturday for my daughter's wedding? And right, you could be overwhelmed by those, right?
Yeah, all the time. And people on my social media channels, it took years, but they finally understand that I do not give personal forecasts. I love to answer questions where thousands of people have the same question and they get the same answer. But one person who says, well, can you just do this favor? And my family does it to me all the time. I'll get a call in the middle of the day. Hey, I'm in Arizona. The sky's dark. Can you look at the radar and tell me what's going on? It's like, no.
There'd be no end to it, right? There'd be no end.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting. It's fascinating how we can just pull up these radars and social media. Like you said, it's a bit of a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
Better engagement, but also I think we need some boundaries with that too as well, right?
Yeah. And psychologically, for many of us, it's also hard to disconnect because the data is there. We have all these alerts. We have company email and company ways to message us. So you have to purposely carve out time for you to just be you when you're not thinking and focusing on the job you do.
Well, that's a good point. If you don't have boundaries, it could just take over and be literally 24/7 all the time,
right,
with your notifications going off. I like what you're saying there, that as forecasters, you need to kind of have that boundary there. This is my professional time, and we all need a little off time as well. So.
Right. And related to that, something else that came up, I was fortunate to serve as president of the National Weather Association in 2018. And that year, we did a lot of talking about forecasting and mental health and the stresses that you deal with when you're trying to help people, you're trying to protect life and property, but at the end of the event, there's a loss of life. And the whole concept of you do the best you can do. There will be times where people lose their lives. But if you are not negligent, it's not your burden. Now, if you were negligent, there's a problem. But in general, you have to prepare for that as a forecaster, that bad things are going to happen, and you have to be strong enough to know that do the best you can do, and that's really all you can do.
That's a good perspective. You can only do your best, and unfortunately, we're always going to see some loss of life and property, right? Even the best forecaster can't avoid that. I've seen in recent years too, forecasters that do a great forecast, communicate it really well, and it reaches the audience. I saw this in Hurricane Ian, people on the ground saying, we heard the forecast. Yeah. We just didn't believe that Mother Nature could do that. So it got me thinking there's more to play there than just if we do an accurate forecast and communicate it, some people are still not going to receive that, right?
Right. Yeah. And that plays into the loss of life. As you said, the cliche, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. You put it out there and it's good information. It's understandable, but people just psychologically say, no, that can't be. It won't be me. It won't impact me that way. It'll be someone else. But yeah, that's a never-ending issue that the sociologists and researchers are still working on.
Well, it's a good point because there's more than just doing an accurate forecast. Even if we forecast everything perfectly, there's still going to be these bad outcomes. Alan, I wanted to ask you a more personal question. Everyone in their career faces zigzags, obstacles, where sometimes we have to pivot or redirect and find ways to overcome this. I mean, what's an example of something a zigzag in your career where you faced an obstacle? How did you overcome it? Any advice you can give for young professionals out there?
Yeah. Yes, I had a lot of zigs and zags, and the best advice is prepare for things that are unexpected, which is like forecasting weather. To me, the first unexpected thing was in my second job in Milwaukee. The man who hired me left. The man who replaced him offered me a salary reduction. I didn't know those things were possible. I was at the end of my contract, and he offered to pay me less than what I was making. And that was the first time I had understood the concept of, it's called the constructive demotion, that no matter how hard you work, no matter how good you are at what you do, if you work for a company, the company's budget dictates your value. So, of course, I was shocked. I was blindsided. I refused the pay cut, but fortunately that pushed me to get to WGN. So sometimes the negative events force you to do something else. I got to WGN in Chicago, and the man who hired me left. He was replaced by a woman who was it was her first time as a news director. And she first said to me, "You do a great job. You have a great future here." And then a year later, she said, "You can stay or you can leave." Those were her words.
So this all happened in a year.
Yeah.
So and it sounds like you're saying here sometimes things can really surprise you very rapidly, right?
Yeah. And it had nothing to do with my job performance. Once again, it was about the budget. She didn't want to pay the rate that I originally was hired at. It turns out she was not a good manager. The company eventually let her go, and I outlasted her and stayed another couple of years before the NBC station made me a job offer. So those are things that I teach broadcasting at the University of South Alabama. I tell my students, yes, train yourself so well that you'll always have a job opportunity, but no matter where you work, there's always that possibility someone will take your job from you by not your fault.
Well, and this is great perspectives. We have a lot of students and young professionals that listen to the podcast. It sounds like you're saying there are things that can happen to you professionally that you can't take personally. It can just be the surrounding environment, the corporate culture, the budget of the company you're working for. It has maybe nothing to do with your performance, right?
Yeah. And that goes for all professions, whether you're private sector or government. There's always a certain amount of politics and economics into what you do. But as I mentioned, I had started doing independent videos when I was in Chicago. You need to have as many skills and abilities as you can and never stop learning, so you'll always have an opportunity.
It's really that concept of diversification, right? That if you're doing all these different things, developing new skill sets, you're going to be more versatile if you have to move into a different organization, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, really a fascinating perspective there. And a little plug for South here. You work at University of South Alabama. You mentioned a lot of the grads there are really getting great job offers even before they graduate. I know that it can be really intimidating for graduating seniors or grad students to find work. It sounds like at South they're doing pretty well with that.
Oh, they're doing great. And I don't just say that because I work there, but for all facets of meteorology, most of the students do great. For the broadcast track students, this year, last year, the majority of them get jobs or job offers before they graduate. So it's still a strong, thriving profession, even though it is evolving like every other profession.
Yeah, for sure. Always evolving. And I wanted to close with that. The last question I want to ask you, where do you see the profession going in the next 10 to 20 years, and how can professionals prepare for that?
Okay. Well, what will remain the same is you will forecast weather, you will communicate weather. What's changing is forecast models and technology is doing a lot more of that forecasting and doing way better than it ever could have done. So a lot of your focus is going to go, as a weather broadcaster, is going to go to the communication aspect of it. And the communication aspect, which traditionally was TV at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, whatever. Now that's social media, it's gas station pumps, it's elevator screens, it's the screen on your refrigerator. You're going to be so many different places still giving weather information. The other thing that will remain the same is the weather broadcaster is the local scientists who will go out in public and teach people and bring the human face of the science to the public.
I've heard that often the local broadcast meteorologist is one of the most trusted people in the community, but also like the voice of science, really.
Yeah.
That even some of these kids may go into biology or something, but they got that spark of interest in science from a broadcast meteorologist, right?
I get that all the time. At this point, I'll see people who are in their mid-30s. I'll meet them on the street. They'll have little kids with them, and they'll say to their kids, "Hey, he came to my school when I was in 3rd grade." So it's just an awesome thing.
Yeah, for sure. And that goes back to how we started this podcast. You were mentioning your 3rd grade teacher taking you out to look at clouds, these impacts we can have even on kids, just something that sparks a curiosity. It can be a simple thing, but they remember back when they were 8 or 10 years old, they did a field trip or they ran into a scientist. And that's really interesting how that plays into your story here all these years later in the amazing career you've had.
Right. Yep.
Alan, thanks so much for coming on the GeoTrek podcast. Listeners, if you did not listen to the previous podcast, it was Alan's insights on forecasting and broadcasting tropical weather. We're expecting an active hurricane season coming up. And I love what you shared, just your perspectives on how to prepare, Alan, and just how people can be thinking about this in the right way. Thank you so much for coming on back-to-back podcast episodes. I I know they're going to be fan favorites. And lastly, I want to ask you, how can people find you? I know you're kind of quote unquote retired, but you're still very active. You're going to conferences, workshops.
Yeah.
I know you're interacting with people online. If people want to find your forecast, interact with you, how can they find you online?
So my big platform is Facebook. So it's Alan Seals Weather on Facebook. I do have a YouTube channel with a lot of little weather explainers, things that people ask frequently. I'm on X, used to be Twitter and Instagram, but Facebook is the best way to find me.
Fantastic. Alan, thank you so much for taking time to come on these back-to-back podcast episodes. Wishing you well. We'll be following your forecasting and your insights through this season and beyond. Thanks so much for taking time to come on the GeoTrek podcast.
Thank you.